Here with Susan Takata, and I am really excited to talk to you, Susan, because I think you and I have very similar stories of the sort of the genesis of our trans identity, and then we sort of went in very different ways. And
Yeah. I think a lot of different ways.
yeah.
I am so glad to talk to you also.
So why don't you just tell me? I know a little bit about your story that like me, and this is actually something that I'm so happy to talk to you about because a lot of people have sort of asked, why is it that some kids who go through trauma might develop a transgender identity, and some kids who go through trauma might become anorexic, and some kids who go through trauma might develop PTSD, and there are all these sort of different trajectories. And one of the things about your story that's so similar to mine is that we got messages from an early age that we were not acting like girls. So why don't
Yes,
you tell your story?
it's so funny you should mention anorexia because that also plays in with me. But part of okay, well, when I was 3 years old, I already knew that I felt like I was the other gender. And basically, to make a long story short, it was number one because of my family cultural background, which is Japanese. I was raised with a bunch of boys, which I didn't have brothers, but all my friends around me were all boys. And so I loved like Hot Wheels and all the you know, Tonka
Cool
trucks
boy
and all of
toys.
that. Yes, yes. And so since from the age of 3, I was like, wow, this is not me. This is, this is I'm supposed to be a boy.
Can
And it
you
was because
really talk
also
about your culture? Because I think you mentioned that you're Japanese and that you were
yeah,
the third girl. And so
yeah.
it was really disappointing, I guess, to your parents that you were not a boy.
Now, of course, they didn't verbalize it, but I would get cues like, oh, well, only boys can do that. Only boys are allowed to say that, or only boys can, My parents were very traditional because they came from, um, even though my dad was born in Canada, he was raised as Japanese in Japan, and my mother came from Japan right after the war. And so they were very traditional, and this is what girls are supposed to be like, and this is what boys are supposed to be like. And so I'm looking at that, and then I'm looking uh, at the messages I'm getting from the TV, the marketing that's going on towards kids with toys. And I'm like, well, no, I fit more into being, this type of person rather than being a girl. And that's why even in BC at this time, there was Nancy Green Rain. She's a senator that's in the Legislative Assembly here, and she was pushing for people to stop advertising, direct advertising towards kids. And they do that with toys. They do that with, fast food restaurants and stuff. But anyways, we're digressing.
Well,
But
and if you were
yeah.
anything like me, the toys my brother had were so much cooler than the toys for girls. I remember, specifically some of the toys he had. He had a helicopter that went around that was so cool, and you could like lower it down to pick up a load and then take it over somewhere else and deliver it. And like the
Yeah.
Matchbox cars and all these toys it just seemed were so much more interesting than the girl toys.
True, and another thing I wanted to mention is that I felt safer as a boy. I did not feel safe as a girl. Some of the boys, innocently, wanted to play doctor with me, and quite innocently we did that. And then also, at that time there was some molestation going on, and I don't really want to name who or anything like that, but there's so so I was thinking my safe place, of course not not intentionally. My safe place was when I was able to digress and to think that bad things were happening to the little girl, but being a male, I was being affirmed and being accepted. Whereas if I thought myself as a female, I wasn't accepted.
So do you think that you dissociated, that you actually sort of split apart your personality, your identity? Or do you feel like you had just integrated the messages about what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl?
A bit of both. And also, I felt badly for my dad because he never had a son, and I felt like I should have been the son that he never had. Yeah, so
So there
that
are
was
a lot of
basically
factors.
so that was basically of course when a kid hits uh, elementary school, the teachers don't have time to ask like, why do you feel this way? And right now too, with what they're all being bombarded with, of course, they're not going to feel safe in asking these questions no longer, which is the danger of the SOGI 123 program. It's a resource. It's not a curriculum, but through policy changing and things, they are making it into a curriculum in some ways.
So some
But
of our
it's
listeners might not know what SOGI is. Can you explain it?
it's a resource that is done in the school system here for teachers. It's called the Sexual Orientation Gender Identity uh, resource that they have, but the word resource is kind of a conundrum in some ways because um, some teachers, if they don't follow through with the resource, they get disciplined. And that would even mean, like a friend of mine was ex-gay, and they had an event that had happened, and the event was advertised for 6 months, 6 months prior to the day, and then 6 months after, they refused to put down the posters. And she said, she said, "Oh, I feel like I'm being assaulted, so like it's time to put down the posters." And so she put them down, and so they decided to they decided that you need to have a little bit of training, yeah, tolerance training.
Indoctrination?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, and if you call people the wrong noun, the wrong verb or whatever, then you're disciplined, right?
And that's really where our stories diverge, I think, because I think the our gender dysphoria, our trans identity was rooted in very similar things. But unlike you, I had a school psychologist who intervened and did not affirm, did not encourage me to believe that there was something wrong with me. Instead, got me some resources, got me help, set up a plan. Whereas you didn't have that kind of
No,
intervention.
no. But we also at that time, in the 60s, as you probably know, that this was not an issue in the school system. And so I actually had friends that were they kind of were more comfortable with calling me my name, my real name, and I just felt like, well, I care about them and I don't want to make them feel any worse, so I just let them call my name.
So
Yeah.
you went through elementary school, high school, presenting as male.
Um, well, presenting as asexual, let's
Okay,
just
so
say that.
gender kind of what would be
Yeah,
called gender nonconforming now,
yeah,
or gender
yeah,
creative, or any of those.
yeah, yeah,
At
yeah.
what point did you really embrace the idea that you wanted people to refer to you as male, to see you as male?
I think I embraced that idea probably in my teens, but like I said, I cared enough about these people that I cared enough about these people that I didn't want them to go through any more pain than they are going through. So I wasn't militant about it, but in my teens, I would say I was more affirming myself that way. Yeah,
And then at
being
some point you got involved with the LGBT community.
just a little bit. Right after I became a Christian, I tried to. I became a Christian when I was in 1980, um,
And you were
and
still transgender at the point.
yeah, I never let go of that. But in 1980, I tried to forget about all that. I try to resolve all my issues by being so by being so busy with Christian things. Like how I was handling it earlier was just by totally keeping myself so busy that it became sort of like a secondary issue in some ways. And so what I did was, after I became a Christian, I tried to do the same thing. I got involved with several ministries and just um, just went in there and totally went in there and just gave my all. But I ended up burning out. I got hurt by some different ministries, and by that time I had been in charge of a church for a little while, and then I got totally burnt out. And after I backslid, I decided, well, this is it. I'm totally going to go into the trans issue, and I want to wipe myself away from and try to forget about the Lord and all that stuff. And um, uh, by when I was a teenager, you see, what I was doing was I was trying also to make myself more presentable by um, becoming the person that that I thought was the best. But not only that, I lost like um, I I I lost like about 60 pounds. Like I was 150 pounds, and then I went down to 90 pounds, and I'm like 5'4.5". And that that issue, also anorexia, was because of the fact that as you're Japanese, and if you're overweight, like even like 120, 130 pounds would be considered overweight, you're not acceptable. So I was just saying, if I make myself the most manliest person I can be, and also be the be become thinner and all that, then I'll be acceptable. So, goodbye, God, until I have time for you, I will be, into doing these things, right? More, that's my concentration right now. So
And it
that's where
really,
the anorexia came in.
yeah, and it
Mhm.
strikes me as that attempt to control our bodies. Because I went through a period in high school where my body was physically changing, and I, was somewhere on the bulimic anorexic side of things. I remember trying to teach my some of the other girls in my high school how to throw up because I had gotten so good at it, and it
Mhm.
is again just another kind of
Mhm.
manifestation of this desire to control our
Mhm.
bodies, a
Mhm.
sense of being unacceptable. But if we just
Mhm.
change a little bit, then we'll be okay. Then we'll be
Mhm.
acceptable. And
Mhm.
and again, accepting, I think, a lot of these ideas about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a girl, and
Yeah.
those really oppressive
Yeah.
messages that you're not okay unless you're
Yes.
incredibly thin. And you
Yes.
had it kind of double because you had it both culturally and from society at large.
Yes, and what kind of complicated things a little bit was, I grew up with a Canadian family right next door, and the mother was so great, the grandmother was so great, and I was getting all these hugs and kisses from her, but I wasn't getting them from my parents, and I didn't realize, they're just showing a different type of love, and so, but anyways. Um, so in 1980, I became a Christian, and the Lord got my attention because I ended up, because of the anorexia, I ended up with tuberculosis in some ways, and I ended up in the hospital, and I became a Christian after I went to the hospital. But as I said, in 1985, I backslid because of all the stuff that had been happening. And I went, and I went further into the transgender issue. And also, when I was 10, I was raped by a very popular man that people would probably recognize around here. Anyways, he started raping kids first, and then he started killing them. So, and when I was at the age of 10, he picked me up, and I ended up getting sexually molested by this guy. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, this 1974, March 11th. And I remember just like it was yesterday, getting out of my female identity, right, and kicking in the male identity. But it's just like your whole being crashes, and you're totally shattered, you know, as a being, because all your defenses are gone as the molestation is happening. And that's when things got just totally more like, see, this is happening because you're a female. This happened because you're a female, and all that. And okay, so to make it a long story short, um, in 1990, around there, um, I had a very, very liberal doctor at that time. I just started going to see her, and I told her everything that I had been trying to do and how I'd been feeling. And she just said to me, well, Susan, you've been trying this long enough. And I knew that to qualify for getting into the gender identity clinic and all that, you have to be living as the opposite sex for at least 2 years at that time, right? And so so the doctor had told me that I'd been trying this long enough. So she told me, well, you've already done it more than 2 years anyway. So they were trying to fast track me to get sexual rehabilitation or sexual, um, yeah, uh,
Reassignment.
the operation that, yeah, sexual reassignment surgery done. And they were trying to fast track me. I didn't realize this until a couple of years ago, because there was another man here in Vancouver that was actually in the same clinic at the same time that I was. And they were trying to fast track him. So anyway,
Which
so
is
I went
actually
to,
really interesting information because a lot of us feel like this is pretty new.
mhm.
But it actually has been going on for a lot longer than people realize.
Yeah, this is 1990. Yeah, and so the lady says, all we really want you to do now is just go see the psychiatrist and get the okay for the psychiatrist, and then we'll just, give you the surgery, kind of thing. And luckily for me, I didn't have to take a lot of hormones because I was already passing as a male with all that stuff. But they would have they started me on some hormones, but I didn't need as many as a lot of people did. And then I just I got a job in a psychiatric group home, and the two of the patients were schizophrenic, and they just, I don't know, they found out that I had been a Christian before for some reason. And even for me on my days off, every day they would come and they would say, Susan, we want to pray for our families. Want to come up and pray with us? Right? So, so here I am. I'm a backslidden Christian, thinking I'm a male, and I didn't want to talk to God. I was just about to go through this surgery stuff, and and they're saying, well, they want me to come up and talk to God. So, every single night, even when I'm not on duty. And so every single night I had to talk to God because they wanted me to talk to God. So as a result of that, I started giving my life back to the Lord. And I went back to a church. I went to a church that a Mormon family actually brought me to, Pentecostal church. and and I rededicated my life there. But as things were going on, and I was trying to overcome everything, um, things get worse sometimes, as you know, right? Rather than better. So so um, the doctors were just like, okay, we're gonna get you ready for doing your surgery and all that stuff. So I said, okay, what am I gonna tell my church? Um, so I went and I got up in front of the young adults one day, and I just said, hey, Susan's going to be gone. You guys got to call me Stephen from now on. And I'm getting this surgery done and all that stuff. And they're like, and but luckily my pastor back in 1990, um, this subject was not really talked about very much. And he just felt like from the Lord, he just felt like saying, Susan, we don't agree with what you're doing, but we love you and we want you to keep coming. Um, I just want to let you know that we're not going to let go of you. And then he took me into his office and talked to me at length, you know. And the Lord must have been really speaking to him, because he was saying, like, why do you feel like this way? And I felt so easy to talk to him. And one of the first things that I said was, I feel like a failure because we're almost the same age, and you have a successful church, whereas my church kind of just folded and all that stuff. And he just said, Susan, you're a wonderful person. And he just said, you've come from a non-Christian background, and I've come from a Christian background. So he just said to me, you've succeeded more than I have. And that's just kind of like, wow, because this is the person that I wanted to be. And, you know, the same color hair, I wanted to be a blonde haired male. And his words were just like really melting. You know, I'll never forget that. Pastor Brett Cantelon from Christian Life Assembly in Langley. And from that, it was just like, and then he says, Susan, I know of a group that can help you out. And they're just a ragtag group of people. And so he said, it's for people that want to get out of homosexuality. And I was like, oh no, I'm not homosexual. I'm a normal male. Why are you sending me to a homosexuals group when I'm a normal male? You know, I would. But anyways, he said, don't worry about the tags. Don't worry about that. But this person will probably be able to help you with some of your pain. And so anyways, I started going to that group, and I'm all the way through the group. I was just like, what am I doing here? I'm not a homosexual. What am I doing here? I'm a normal male. You know, and gradually uh, through the group, the head person there was an ex-trans person herself, and she for the first year, I would say, she didn't dare call me a girl, and she didn't dare call me a lesbian. Or say something like same-sex attracted, and it just would bother me. I'd be at the group, and I'm like, they're talking about same-sex attraction. You know, I'm a male, so you know this doesn't apply to me. And gradually, I began to realize that I was a female, and that there are reasons why I was running away from that identity. And I had a small group at my church. Four guys by the name of Greg decided every day to have a prayer meeting with me, not to make me into a project, but they had their own problems and they needed to have prayer. So we got together every day and prayed with each other. And they wouldn't be preaching at me, but they would say things like, that's what my ex-wife used to do, Susan. Oh, oh no. Okay. And they would drop hints like that for a long time. And that helped me in some ways more than the group did. Um, they would take me to like beaches and things, and I'd be there picking out girlfriends for them and all that stuff, and doing stuff like that. And gradually they helped me to see why I'm different and how I'm different. And my whole home group was like that. And so part of what I'm doing right now also is to help home groups to see that as they grow closer to the Lord, they can help people like me E- And sometimes it's better when you don't have any training. And sometimes it's better when you don't have any background in this whole issue, because they helped me to see that a lot of things that I was struggling with, they struggle with also. And
It's kind
so,
of, it sounds to me like they were kind of like the LGBT activists say that we need to affirm people as their trans identity. And it sounds like what they were doing was affirming you as a woman. And maybe
and not
that's
saying it. Yeah.
maybe that's part of the, you know, the narrative now is that the appropriate way to interact with someone with a trans identity is to affirm that trans identity. But in your case, you were able to overcome it by people sort of pointing out to you the disconnect there.
Well, they helped me to see the beliefs that I had within myself, that they were wrong, uh, and and um, and they helped me to see that without saying it.
And it sounds like they did it in a very loving way.
Yes, yes. And when I did go see a counselor, his name was Rob Bruce. He had no training in the LGBT issue at all, and he told me that when I was coming to see him, he was like, he didn't know what he was supposed to be doing, and so he told me that he would be praying fervently about, Lord, what does she need to hear? What does she need to hear from you today? What do you want us to do? And so he didn't really follow a program, but followed a discipleship program. Who you are in Christ. What did the Lord call you to do? And it wasn't necessarily gendered based, but you know, like as I was seeing the truth through the Bible about who I am, and I had to come to the realization that God is never wrong, and God is always right. And as I began to realize that He was the firm reality that I was searching from when I was a toddlerhood. Even when I was a toddler, I was telling myself, I want to live the real life. I don't want to live in a fantasy. I want to live the life that I was supposed to live. And you know, even though I tried to commit suicide a couple of times and all that, and um, I just said, I want to live the truth, whatever it is. And and as I was thinking about that, and we were saying, okay, the Lord will show you the truth. And the one thing was that He's the only one that changes, that never changes. Sorry, He's the only one that never changes. So if you have that rock of knowing something that never changes, then you know, then you have a point, you know, a pinpoint for that. So
And I think that
that was
I think about the truth, you know, for those who are Christians, having that biblical truth is so important. Having that understanding that God sees you for who you are and who He made you. But for non-Christians, there's also the biological truth.
mhm, mhm.
And it really bothers me that trans activists are telling people that they're inherently flawed.
Yeah,
And to me, that is just, you know, from a, you know, purely humanistic
yeah,
viewpoint, that's an incredibly damaging thing to tell kids. And
yeah,
so it seems like regardless of whether you have a Christian foundation or not, that the truth really is that there is no such thing as being born in the wrong body, that
yeah,
that your biology does determine whether you're male or female.
yeah, yeah. And can I just say something with the Black Lives Matter issue right now too? Um, really, what really screwed me up as far as like truth, um, it was the images that I was getting from the media, and the pornography issue is really bad for that. And see, again, you see in the pornography issue that women are victims, and males are the more dominant ones. And by the time I started getting into the pornography issue when I was 13, I was already very well cemented in my fact that I felt like I was a Christian. Sorry, I wasn't a Christian, but I was a male. And And luckily for me, though, I was a musician, so I had long hair. I was a rock musician, so so a lot of people didn't question about what I felt about my gender,
But
which
I think one of the things that you're kind of pointing towards is this idea that if you tell a group of people that they're victims, then it's really that's a really heavy load.
mhm,
That and if all the messages that they're getting is that they're victims,
mhm,
and that there's something that's oppressing them, and there's nothing that they can do
mhm,
to overcome that oppression, you're
mhm,
really disempowering them.
mhm. And what used to be taught through Living Waters at Andy Comiskey um, was that there was in our void with people that are same-sex attracted. We try to fill what we're lacking from our sense of what being women are, and that comes out of attraction to another woman. And so, like some women are attracted to big-breasted women and all that stuff, and that's where the pornography kicked in for me. Um, I I was attracted to women, that I felt like were more female than I was in the pornography. Um, so that really plays a really bad rap on the gender identity. And the movies, so the Black Lives Matter, of course. Um, how do we see the police? We see the police as being violent in a lot of ways, and that's glorified in that. But anyways, I don't want to get into that. But so the
Can you
media
tell me a
really
little bit
needs to.
about, because we talked beforehand and you mentioned sort of the ministry that you're doing now, which is to work with people who maybe didn't transition, but who had gender dysphoria and have tried to sort of navigate that, and how hard that is for them sometimes
Oh yeah,
to view
oh yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, well, for instance, when we become Christians in the 70s, we were told uh, to accept Jesus as our Savior. And in the 70s, this was God loves you, God loves you. And then took me a lot longer to figure out that God is supposed to be also our master, right? He's supposed to be the ones that are making decisions in our life. But so discipleship, proper discipleship is really important. But we get instilled like even in the 70s there was people like what's his name, Ray Boltz. He was terrible story for him. He was struggling and he was making mega bucks as a Christian singer and he wanted help, and um, his label told him to shut up, and 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 also it was like, oh, if you know God well enough, oh, if you were dedicated more, or if you just did this or just did that, um, that's impounded on you, right? And then, oh, we don't want you to talk. I know a lady that used to be a head of a ministry here. She went down to an ex-gay conference um, back in the 1990s, and she asked for prayer, you know, for her own healing, for more healing. And the leaders were like, "You're a leader. You can't go up and get prayer. You're a leader. We can't pray for you." And many leaders are still like that. Oh, I'm a pastor. I can't go up and pray. I get prayer, and the tremendous um, pressure to not come out with problems and with their own issues um, just keeps people quiet. And then the condemnations for having the issues um, that
Yeah, I especially see that with pornography. There's such a stigma about it
yeah.
that it's really hard for people who are struggling with pornography to get support from Christian communities because there's so much stigma.
Yes. And I would have people saying, well, I never took hormones and I never did this or that, but you know what, they had a whole lot more healing that they needed to have done because of the messages that they told themselves and that were impounded on them, and they needed to keep it quiet. And so that's why I'm talking, because there's a whole lot of people out there that are just feeling ashamed of asking for help, and they're just saying, well, somebody else needs more help. But really, when I look at somebody that's come out of the trans issue, even with all the hormones and all that, and if they didn't come from church, right? They had a lot of less baggage in some ways, emotional baggage.
So,
So
so,
they,
so you're saying that people who grew up Christian, who then fell into the trans lifestyle, sometimes have more healing to do than somebody who didn't have a Christian background, and
yes,
who kind of resolve or came, detransition. Just
yes,
and it's that because of that judgment and shame,
yes,
which
yes,
is so sad because God forgives us. And that's one of the things that's the message of Christianity that is so powerful, is
yes.
that forgiveness. And I believe that being able to feel forgiven is how you can let go of that shame.
hmm 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 And we get so much. That's why you got to really be careful about what you preach over the pulpit too, because some of that stuff came through the pulpit, and you- word faith and all that stuff. Like I'm not putting down word faith, right? But some of that stuff comes through the pulpit, like being very performance based. And uh, so, anyways, I have a harder time sometimes seeing results in helping people that are coming from a church-based background, and also it's always a temptation because they actually don't know, since they haven't gone fully into the lifestyle, what they're not missing.
Mm.
And whereas the people that have gone fully into the lifestyle, they know what they're not missing, right? So, so it's the, oh, I wonder, the unopened Pandora's box that still can drag people in there.
Well, I think oftentimes people they want to find a solution to their discomfort, and the trans narrative is such a great solution because you just get to become a different person,
Yeah,
and you get to kind of design that new person. You get to pick a name, you get to pick the pronouns, you get to
yeah,
change your presentation. So it's just a way of sort of leaving your old self behind that maybe you're very uncomfortable with, and just embracing this new self.
mm-hmm.
But you and I both know that no matter how much you try and run away from yourself, you
Yeah, yeah.
can't.
You can't. You can't. You can never get away from the fact that you're not a real male. This might sound sick, but years ago, back in the 1990s again, I was thinking I'm going to be the first male to give birth. you know, and so you can't get rid of the fact that no, you're actually a female, right?
And I
Yeah,
think that your warning for Christians is really important. There are lots of different perspectives on this, and I've heard some people who say that that as Christians, it's our job to uphold truth. Therefore, we should not affirm or humor or in any way honor a trans person's identity. But what you're saying is that these are people, especially if they come from a Christian background, that are carrying a great deal of shame
yeah,
and unhealthy messages, and that we need to meet them where they are
yes, yes, and with respect,
with
because
respect.
I was willing to listen to my friends because they were willing to listen to me about, um, like I said, I was involved with this prayer meeting, and I was able to call them out on their stuff too, and so they didn't make me into a project, right?
And I think that's the key, is that everybody has issues. Everybody has baggage. Everybody has shame. Some of us are uh, more able to talk about it, and it's so interesting, the being able to move away from that shame into a place where you're open and talking about it. One of the things that I've learned from this is that the people that I'm interviewing oftentimes are sort of an open book. Because they've started talking about their lives, there's a lot about them that they kind of wish that they didn't have to share, but they end up sharing it. And in some ways, it's incredibly relieving. It's like a weight is lifted off their shoulders because they no longer have to try and hide that part of themselves that they're ashamed of.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important also to allow people to. Women need to have more women as role models. Part of why I fell so heavily into the trans issue was because number one, um, I gave myself a lot of messages unknowingly, and like I said, I was a rock musician, and most of the musicians that the bands that I was really fond of, they were all males. And so I'm listening to these lyrics and I'm singing these lyrics, um, like Simon and Garfunkel, like Cecilia, you're breaking my heart, and all that stuff. And I'm singing these things to myself. And so, oh yes, that's the way I feel. Yes. And so it's affirming. And nobody, I was kind of androgynous in a lot of ways. And I had long hair because the guys that I really admire for the bands and the Guess Who and all that, they all had long hair. So don't assume that anybody that wants to be a boy, that's a girl, is going to have short hair, right?
Well, isn't that funny that the way the trans movement now is actually kind of reinforcing these funky stereotypes that we sort of got away from in the 70s and 80s a little bit, and now they're kind of coming back with a vengeance, so that the message is, if you're a boy who wants to have long hair, well, you might actually be a girl. Like, it's just this funny, like, it's like we're totally going backwards in that. But I think what you say is important, that sometimes you don't know what internalized messages somebody has based on how they're presenting externally.
Yeah.
And so, the trans movement is very open about that. It's sort of like they're saying, "Here I am." But there are some people who have some of these identity confusions going on, and you may not know about it because they're not presenting.
Hmm. And something that the ex-trans movement has to stop doing is looking at somebody and saying, well, you didn't go through all the hormones, so you didn't go through the surgery, so your story is null and void. And they have to stop saying that. Or you weren't as bad as I was.
Yeah,
That's another
it
thing.
is kind of funny that there's sort of a hierarchy of detransitioning, and
Mhm.
how
There is, and certain people are suffering more physically because of the hormones that they took. I was lucky enough that I was passing as a male, just because I was Oriental. A lot of Oriental males don't have a lot of facial hair anyways. But I lost my voice. Like I lost my voice. My voice still hasn't come back. And so there's different things that you can't get back, right? Yeah, and so we need to talk to kids about that. It's that even if you stop taking hormones, some things don't come back.
Right. A lot of the women that I talk to who have been on hormones, even for a short time, they have to shave every morning. Their voice
Yeah,
is permanently changed. There are some pretty significant changes that happen in their genital regions.
yeah.
So these are things that these people that you have to live with. And it is interesting to me that we have this sort of and it comes from both sides, because you have people who are pro-transgender who say, well, if you get detransitioned, it means you were never really transgender. And then we have some people who are detransitioned who say, well, if you never took hormones, you were never transgender. So it's sort of this,
Mhm.
it's interesting. It seems like as a society that we have a lot of these sort of boxes that we have to fit into.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's people like me who never saw themselves as being gay. Would say, well, if you were gay and then you decided that you were a man, or you're a lesbian and then you decided you're a man, well, you're not really a trans person,
See, and
because
that's what's
I would never
interesting because
I would never say gay.
when I was younger, I intentionally cultivated relationships with girls because I was a guy. Like, you know, it never even occurred to me that that was same-sex attraction or lesbian or anything. Like, I was
Yeah,
a guy. And
yeah.
so the girlfriends that I had were my girlfriends and I was their boyfriend. And I was, I was young when this was going on. So this was
Yeah.
before I really hit puberty, but I was very clear in my mind that they were my girlfriends and I was the boyfriend. I was
Hmm,
not a
hmm,
lesbian. I was
hmm,
the
hmm.
boyfriend.
And you know what was really damaging is that sometimes when I've talked about my background to Christians, uh, all the women would treat me like their boyfriend, even in church. And when they were having their problems with their boyfriends, they'd come up to me. Um, yes, to talk about the problems that they were having with their boyfriends, but then they wanted me to take them out. They wanted me to, do all that stuff. And
There's
yeah,
some
it
really
kind of,
mixed messages.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so, anyways, so we have to watch it, because I was like, well, these guys are gay. What am I doing in this group? you know? And so if anybody had told me that I was a lesbian back then, I wouldn't have listened to them at all. So my counselor, out of the Lord's wisdom, never called me a lesbian. And so did the lady that was helping me at that ex-gay group. Never called me a lesbian, because she knew that I would tell her that she's that she's strange. But they didn't say same-sex attracted or anything. So that's one thing I kind of warn people, if they're going to be interacting with trans people that want to get out, is don't automatically assume that they want to be called ex-gay. Don't automatically assume that they want to, that they had same-sex attraction. You know,
Because in their
don't.
minds, it wasn't same-sex attraction.
Yeah, yeah, you know
So
that.
interesting. Yeah. So Susan, how are you doing now? It sounds like you've completely accepted yourself as a woman
Yes.
and you're very much involved in your church.
Yeah, I'm involved. Yeah. When we are here.
So is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
We need to begin doing more outreach outside the church, and going into some people wouldn't want to do this, but to go into the gay community and go outside of the church, because sometimes I feel like even at our conferences that we're kind of speaking to the choir in a lot of ways. But there are enough people that have family members in the church, enough for us to keep busy, as far as that's concerned. But but I think we need to find more effective evangelism.
And I think that there has been some really damaging evangelism from some Christians.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even like to call them Christians because I feel like what they did was so harmful and damaging. That's hateful, that is judgmental, that is condemning of people who are in the LGBT communities, and it's really made it so difficult for those of us who want to reach out with a loving heart.
That's another thing I wanted to tell you about, actually. Lately, I've been getting really pissed off. Sorry. Um, well, because when there's an article, or if there's a news clip or YouTube clip where somebody actually gives their name, the Christian community would actually take down that name and then plaster the whole thing all over Facebook, and call them weird, call them losers, call them whatever. I just see the double standards that the Christians have, that we as Christians have, and I'm like, okay, well, it's okay to make fun of this person because they felt like they were pregnant, even though even though they're a man. They felt like they were pregnant. They need to go to a pregnancy test, and so somebody took that person's private post and put it on Facebook, and all the Christians are laughing at that person.
it's so easy to mock people. It's so easy to make fun of them. It's so easy to shame them. It's so hard to love them and to see them as, equally or worthy of love as anybody else. And I think that's where Christians really could reach people, is by reflecting God's love
Mhm.
rather than making fun of people, mocking them. And I see that both Christians and, I see it everywhere on Facebook. It's not just Christians. It seems like that's sort of the default at this point, is
Mhm.
if you don't like what somebody does, you make fun of them, or you call them stupid, or you call them a Nazi. And I think that you're right, that it's important that we don't do that. Maybe sharing that information in a loving way, as in, here's a person who's hurting so much that they can't accept their body. Here's a person who is got such deep wounds that they believe that they're inherently flawed. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank
I'm
you.
excited that you are speaking out about your experience, because I think that there are a lot of people who have had similar experiences. Maybe they didn't quite take it as far as you did, but still have those kind of strange feelings of who am I and where do I fit in? And
Mhm.
now we have a narrative that if you have any of these feelings, that you're actually transgender. And it's so important to get word out that
Mhm.
a lot of people have these feelings, and it doesn't mean you're transgender.
Mhm. And also don't let them fast track you, because as I was saying earlier, somebody else that I didn't even know back in 1990, I just got to know him just a couple of years back, but we found out that we were both being fast tracked. Like they're checking off things that we didn't even finish, right? So
And they're doing that even more now. I mean, it's possible to go in and get hormones at some of the Planned Parenthood clinics. Just, you can get them the same day you go without any kind of a therapist letter at all. So
yeah.
that fast tracking has gotten even faster now, and it's so important to have some time to think about these issues, especially when you're feeling these, like you want to run away from yourself. That's the time where you need to stop and reflect.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.